This is the day of good news, right? I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that there's no preaching in heaven. The bad news is you're not there yet. So you're going to get it tonight. Turn to Matthew chapter 5. There's an innocent sounding sentence in the Sermon on the Mount that contains enough dynamite to change the course of the world.
Yeah.
In it, we find that Christ gives to us a great truth, which is that we can have abundant life.
Amen. Yeah.
And it's really too bad that people have passed by on the other side and left this little truth alone.
Yeah.
Come on, preach.
Yeah.
Look in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 41. It simply tells you there that if someone forces you to go 1 mile,
Amen.
go with him
That's right.
2 miles.
That's right.
The background and the setting of this verse is very important. Whenever the Roman Empire would conquer a province or a town, sometimes they made the entire population of that province pass under the Roman yoke, or else sometimes it was just the leaders. But what they were doing in that was simply pointing out to us that the people that did that was paying tribute or obedience to the Roman Empire. We find that in all of this, there were some things that they had to do. If a Roman soldier or a Roman official wanted you to carry a pack for a mile, or guide him for a mile, or run an errand for a mile, it was a must. There were other things that were written in that, and one of the other things that was written was down at the bottom of the page in the small print, that if you as an individual had to carry this pack, the only way that you had to carry it more than a mile was for there to be an emergency. Now, if there was an emergency, then you had to carry it further than 1 mile. So, this was a humiliating experience for a Jew. The Jewish people are very proud people. And this was most humiliating to them. I have read that the Roman Empire stipulated down, and you have to get this in your mind, that only in an emergency did they have to go further than that. So every Jewish boy would mark off a distance of 1 mile in every direction. They would put down a wooden peg in the ground, put their signet upon it, so that if they had to run an errand for a mile, or carry a pack for a mile, or guide you for a mile, that when they came to that peg, unless it was an emergency, they didn't have to go any further. Now, with this in mind, I want you to look at that great crowd that is gathered around Jesus as he is proclaiming to what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. And the people are marveling at what Jesus has to say, because some of the things that he is saying all of the things that he is saying are absolutely wonderful. And they're smiling and they're acknowledging the great truths that Jesus is presenting.
Amen.
When suddenly into their midst he drops this bomb. If someone forces you to go a mile, go with him 2 miles. And you can see those people as they put their fists together, digging their nails into the palms of their hands, and they're shaking their head, and they're nudging their partner, and they're saying, "What's wrong with this man? What's he talking about? Is he saying that we are to be obedient to the Roman Empire? He must be nuts." Modern terminology. He must be nuts to even think or even suggest that we be obedient to the Roman Empire. I think that Jesus deliberately made that obnoxious Roman rule a carrier for a great principle of life.
That's good. Come on.
What does he mean? If someone forces you to go a mile, then you have to go 2 miles. What's he really talking about? I want to point out to you tonight that he is certainly not talking about the fact that you are to literally go another mile, or run an errand for another mile, or to guide someone for another mile. What Jesus is talking about here is that we are to do just a little bit more
Come on.
than we are expected to do.
That's good. That's good.
I want everybody to go just like that. Just a little bit more. Will you do that?
Yeah.
Just a little bit more than we are expected to do. Because the Sermon on the Mount is talking about the abundant life.
Amen. Come on.
And you can't have abundant life without going the 2nd mile.
Yes.
So there are 4 things that I want to talk about tonight. First of all, the 2nd mile always leaves a deposit of happiness in the heart of the one who travels it.
That's right.
Now, I don't think that this is overdrawn. But I said the other night, I want you to use your holy imaginator.
That's right.
Yes.
I want you to try to visualize a scene. Down the road comes a Roman soldier, and he's carrying a pack on his shoulder. Over here is a young Jewish boy. He is hoeing in his garden. And so this Roman soldier comes to this point, and he sees that Jewish boy, and he says to him, "Lad, come here. I want you to carry my pack." And as you look at that young boy, you can see as he lifts up from looking at his plowing that there are chains of lightning flashing from his eyes. Why? Simply because he hates the Roman soldier.
Yeah. Come on.
And so he lays down his hoe. He very slowly makes his way across the field, climbs over the fence, comes over and reaches down and just picks up the end of that pack. And down the road they go. He dragging the pack along. Why? Because he's not going to do any favors for that Roman soldier. He's just going to do what is required out of him. And so he carries it along without saying a single solitary word to that man. But after a while he comes to a peg that's in the road. And the Roman soldier says, "Is that your peg?" He says, "Yes, it is." And that young man says to the Roman soldier, "Is this an emergency?" And he says, "No, it isn't. Well, he says, "Mister, this is as far as I'm taking your pack." And he turns and he says to the man, "I want you to know, sir, that one of these days that our people are going to be on top. And when they are, I'm going to look you up and I'm going to make life miserable for you." Switch gears for just a moment. Down the road comes a Roman soldier carrying a pack. Over here is a Jewish boy working in his garden, hoeing it. And when this Roman soldier gets to this point, he calls out and he says, "Hey lad, come and carry my pack." And that young boy looks up and he smiles, puts his hoe down, runs across the field, leaps over the fence, goes over, picks up the pack and puts it on his shoulder, and the two of them began to go towards the city. They're talking all the way there. After a while, there's a peg in the road, and that Roman soldier says, "Is that your peg?" And he says, "Yes, it is." And the Roman soldier said, "Well, this is not an emergency. You don't have to go any further than this." That young boy said, "Sir, if I may I carry your pack another mile to the gates of the city?" And he said, "Someday, I want to tell you, sir, that I'm going to look you up. And I'm going to thank you for the good things that you have done for me and for my people." And with that, he puts the pack down and he goes back to his field and he does 2 hours work in less than an hour. Why? Because someone forced him to go a mile. But he decided, "I'll go the second mile." There is something else, and that is the second mile calls for the best in people. You can't possibly travel the second mile without influencing someone else
Come on, preach.
to go the second mile.
That's right.
Take your mind for a moment to a wintry, cold day like today,
Oh, this isn't cold.
to the city of Chicago.
That might be cold.
The president of the Kiwanis International is speaking in the city of Chicago. He's in his hotel room. He calls for his car to be brought around. And so he goes down to the lobby of that hotel, has his winter coat on, all ready to go out into the night. And he sees his car pull up. And as he does, he opens the door and dashes towards his car. Out of the side of his eye, he sees a storefront, and stooping down in that storefront is a young boy. And so he stops immediately. And he walks over to that young boy and he says, "Son, what's wrong?" "Nothing, mister. Not a thing wrong." The man says, "Son, I have 2 boys at home. And I know when a little boy's in trouble. What's your problem?" The little boy said, "You see, this is a list of the things that I was supposed to get at the store. But the wind was blowing so hard and it's so cold. The $5 bill I had in my hand just flew away and I don't know where it is. Well, the man says, son, go on back home. Tell your father what happened. He'll understand. Little boy said, mister, you don't know my daddy. My daddy was half drunk when I left home to go to the store. And if I go home and tell him that I lost that $5, he'll beat me nearly to death. I'm not going to go home for a while. And so the man said, look, boy, where's the grocery store? And he says, right down there. He said, come on with me. He said, I'll help you out. And so they started walking down towards the store. That little boy looked up at that man and he said, mister, I don't know when I'll be able to pay you back. And so they went down to the grocery store, got the small list that was things that were on the list and put them in a bag. And the man paid for them, put the change in the bag. That little boy took the groceries and he walked over to the door. And he set them down. And he came back. He put his arms up as far as he could around that man and looked into his face. And he said, mister, I wish I had a daddy just like you. Years went by. This president of the Kiwanis International was sitting in his office in Jackson, Mississippi. His secretary came in and said to him, there's a young man out here that insists upon seeing you. He said, what's his name? He said he didn't give me a name, but said it's really important to see you. He said, all right, show him in. And that young boy came in, shook hands with that man, and he said, mister, you probably won't remember this, but some years ago, I was a little boy in a storefront that lost $5. And the man smiled and he said, yes, I remember. I often wondered whatever happened to you. He said, sir, because of what you did for me, I went to Bible college and became a preacher. And today, I'm working among the youth on the streets in the city of Chicago, Illinois. You see, you can't go the second mile without influencing someone else.
That's right.
Amen. Amen.
The third thing that I want you to see is that the second mile lightens life burdens.
Hallelujah.
That's right.
The second mile is one of the grandest principles that Jesus ever gave for happiness in the home. I honestly believe that if one person in a home would practice the second mile, that he alone or she alone could transform a home.
Amen.
How many homes would have stayed together if the people in those homes really practiced the second mile?
Come on.
Doing just a little bit more, get it up there, doing just a little bit more than is expected out of you. As I told you this morning, Annabelle and I have been married for 62 years. People say, how do you do it? And I say, just a little bit more. I'll do just a little bit more. And it's not all one-sided,
Come on.
because she says, I'll do just a little bit more. And you know what you ought to do? You ought to go around this week and all of this month and say to your mate, don't have to say a word. She'll know just a little bit more. You see, the thing that happens is, too many of us fail to go the love mile. And that's what Jesus really called it. The thing that happens is that we subtract something from the love mile. Let me explain to you what I mean. Here is a man who has a position where he has to wear a suit to work. It's Monday morning. Monday morning. And he's had breakfast already, but he decides he's going to wear this suit. And when he starts to put the coat on, there's a button off the coat. And so he decided, well, I'll go downstairs and I'll say to my wife, sew him the button for me, will you? So he takes the coat and he goes downstairs and leans up against the doorpost, and here she is in here over the sink, and she is doing dishes in some kind of harsh detergent. And she has her hair all rolled up in coat hangers, and she has one of those old chenille robes on and no makeup. And so he says to her, hey, I want to wear this suit. And it's got a button off. Would you mind sewing it on for me? And men, look. She turned around and she gave him this. There's nothing in the world that I'd rather do on a Monday morning than to sew a button on for you. Goes over and snatches the coat out of his hands and goes up to the sewing room and sews the button on. When she comes down, she just throws it at him. That man goes off to work. There's no spring in his step, no song on his lips, and all day long and all week long, things are not good in that household. But Friday comes, and he is sitting, reading the newspaper and halfway watching television, and she comes in to him and she said, you know, we've had some extra expenses this week, and I was just wondering if I could have $10. And he looked up at her and he said, $10? What happened to that $10 I gave you 2 weeks ago? There's no happiness in that home. But the scene changes. It's Monday morning. And here's this guy. He wants to wear this suit. And he finds out that it has a button off. And so he goes down the steps with his coat, leans against the door, and there's his wife over at the sink doing dishes. But she's doing dishes in joy. Makes all the difference in the world. And not only that, like every woman should have on Monday morning, her hair was all combed, she had on a nice dress, had her makeup on, and he said, honey, would you mind You don't get that at home? And said, would you sew on a button for me? And she said, honey, there's nothing in the world that I'd rather do than to sew a button on your jacket on Monday morning. And she takes that coat, she goes up to the sewing room, and she sews the button on, and she comes down, and she says, honey, I'll hold it for you. And he puts it on, and when he turns around, she puts her arms around him and gives him a smooch that he doesn't forget all day.
Come on with it.
He goes out that door with a spring in his step and a song on his lips because he's looking forward to coming home in the evening. So the week goes, and he's sitting there reading the newspaper, and he is halfway watching television, and his wife comes in, and she said, honey, you know, we've had some company this week. And I was just wondering if I could borrow $10. And he looks up at her and he says, sweetheart, you're the best manager of money I've ever seen. Here's not $10, but here's $50.
There you go. That might be worth it.
You see, really makes a difference.
That's right.
That's right.
Did you read in the newspaper just recently where there was a tornado over in Illinois? Came through a farmhouse, and took the husband and wife who were in bed right out into the cornfield. And she sat up and began to laugh and to laugh and laugh. And he turned to her and he said, woman, what on earth's wrong with you? Why are you laughing at a time like this? She said, I was just thinking, we've been married for 14 years, and this is the first time we've been out together. You see? What is it? We do just a little bit more than is expected out of it. Now we laugh about it, but what a difference it would make
That's right.
in the atmosphere of our home
That's right.
if we would just do a little bit more than is expected of us. And that is not all just applicable to our homes.
Come on, man.
That's right.
That's applicable to the church,
That's right.
who is the bride
That's right.
of Christ.
Amen.
Last of all, God went the second mile.
Yes, and more.
Jesus never gave us a commandment that he himself did not live.
That's right.
Amen.
And the greatest second mile that has ever been presented to the world is Jesus, the Christ, the Son of the living God.
Amen.
You remember that God created the world. And he created man and placed man in the Garden of Eden. Man turned away from God.
That's right.
But God loved us so much that he sent to us Jesus Christ,
Thank you.
who did not do just a little bit more, but he did a lot.
That's right.
Amen.
He went to the cross of Calvary to die for us.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
In the Passion play that takes place at Abramelech, there are some scenes in it that are not in the New Testament, but the concept is the same. The curtain goes up and reveals just from the knees down soldiers and people, the crowd. And you can see that someone is dragging something. And then the curtain goes on up. And you see that it's the soldiers. And they're leading Jesus out to Calvary. And he has on his shoulder the cross. And pretty soon he falls under the weight of that cross. The centurion that is in charge looks over the crowd and he finds a man. And he says to this man, "Come and carry the cross." And the man begins to argue. And he said, "I just came here. I just arrived here in Jerusalem. I don't even know who this man is. And you want me to carry his cross?" Centurion says, "Come carry the cross." Jesus had been over, does not reveal his face. But when the man walks up to him, and Jesus looks into his face, he says, "Oh no, not you, Jesus. You who healed my son." And he went to the centurion and he said to him, "Sir, I will not only carry his cross, but if you'll permit me to do so, I'll even die in his stead." We have a lot to learn.
We do.
Because I think that's a beautiful illustration of God's second mile and what God's second mile inspires men to do. Do just a little bit more. That is expected of us. I tell you, folks, we need to get the idea that God expects us to do just a little bit more than is expected out of us. And when you apply that to your home or apply that to your church, what a difference. What a difference it will make. God loved you so much that he was willing to do just a little bit more. And I want to challenge you. I really do want to challenge you. To do just a little bit more for God. And I want to tell you tonight, you can't do a little bit more for him unless you're his.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
If you've never accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, then you're not going to do anything for him. But if you come to him, he'll give you an inspiration. He'll give you a new life.
That's right. Amen.
Amen.
Old things will pass away,
That's right.
and behold, all things become new. I tell you that on this resurrection day, what better time would there be
That's right.
than right now to say, "Lord, I am appreciative of the fact that you were willing to do just a little bit more for me."
Thank you, Lord.
And consequently, give your life to Jesus Christ. Brother Bill's going to come. We're going to have an invitation. If you're here, you need to come. Give yourself totally to him.
Amen.
You know why? Because life will not be just a little bit better. Life will be a lot better.
Yes, it is.
So will you come as we stand and sing?
Thank you, Lord.
I want to encourage you tonight that maybe you already know the Lord, but there's been areas of your life that you've been hurt, and that you've just been doing whatever you could do to just get by.